Welcome back to Black Girl Watching, where we break down your favorite films and TV shows. I'm Brooke Obie, critic, writer, editor, and screenwriter.
And I'm Brittany Danielle, writer, editor, cultural critic who loves watching Black art. And today we are here to talk about Lovecraft Country, episode 9, the penultimate episode, Rewind 1921.
Right, so if you want to join in on the conversation, follow us on Twitter at BLKGRL Watching and use the hashtag Black Girl Watching on Twitter and Instagram to share your thoughts, ask your questions, give us your theories for this final episode, all that.
And today we have a super special guest joining us to break down the episode and to help us process all of the trauma and emotions, because I was very emotional while watching this episode. Dr. Imani Walker, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, you guys.
Yes, Dr. Walker is a psychiatrist. She's a podcaster at Imani State of Mind. She's a star of the hit reality show Married to Medicine, and we're super happy to have you on the show to help us process all this.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm on Married to Medicine Los Angeles, just in case anybody from the Atlanta show gets all, funky. So I'm here bright and early to discuss Lovecraft Country with you guys. So, hopefully my bedroom voice that I have, it's not meant to be sexy. It's just because I just woke up.
Well, we appreciate you for waking up and being here with us. And if anybody has not watched this episode yet, there are spoilers ahead. We are getting all into every single thing about episode 9, Rewind 1921. So pause this podcast, go watch the show if you haven't seen it, and then come back and then we'll talk about it. So let's get into our first reactions. Dr. Imani, what did you think when you watched this show?
Okay, so first of all, let me just, for the record, I love Lovecraft Country. I didn't know what the show was going to be about when I first saw previews for it. I was just like, ooh, Black people and monsters who aren't white people. So I'm like, that's great. Let's go. I really love science fiction, and especially when it comes to, Black folks. That being said, when I first saw this episode, I was hyped because I was like, oh my God, this is going to be great. So this is the second to last episode. Something big is probably going to happen. But honestly, over the past few episodes, every episode, I think starting with the, I forgot the name of the episode of when, Tick was in, Korea.
Meet Me in Daegu.
Yes. So ever since that episode, the hour will pass when I'm watching the show, and by the end of the episode, my mouth is just open, oh my God. So here's what I was thinking. First of all, I got confused for a second because when in this episode they traveled to Tulsa, I was conflating this show with Watchmen. So I was like, wait a second, okay, what world am I in? And then I was honestly, I was really quite surprised and pleasantly surprised that I think for as long as, I've known about the Tulsa race massacre. I actually used to live in Tulsa when I was 11, 12. And so that's really when I first had heard of it. And I think, as Black folks, we have this double life of sorts. There's things that we know from popular culture because that's what, we have been kind of assimilated into, indoctrinated into. And then there's things that we as Black folks know as fact. And then it's always interesting when people who aren't Black are like, oh, wow, is that true? Did that really happen? It's yeah, that really happened. That was dumb old. They happened a long time ago. So I was actually really happy to see that this event, the Tulsa Race Massacre, has been getting so much attention. One of the things I love about Lovecraft Country, I was actually having a conversation recently with my mom, and she was like, what I really love about this show is that when it shows really powerful Black folks, and it shows really opinionated Black folks who are really into action. And she said the great part is that it's you almost see the evil people, the white people, punished right then and there, as opposed to having to wait, which is really, really for me, it's a very revolutionary act. It's very nice to be able to not have to sit with my emotions and then have to be oh God, please, I hope this happens. I hope this person gets, their just desserts. So I do love that about Lovecraft Country. However, it's always difficult to watch Black people go through pain and there was a lot of pain on the account of various characters in this episode. Like last episode, it was more so like D. And not that other people weren't going through it, but her pain was so much greater than everyone else's. And with this episode, it was D, it was Hippolyta, it was, Tick was crying throughout the whole episode, which I love to see. His dad, and then Letty, like everybody was going through it. And then it was in the backdrop of this race massacre. So the whole time I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. But it's always hard for me to sit and reckon with seeing, Black folks in pain.
Absolutely. What do you think, Brittany?
I think I've been saying this for the last few episodes. My first reaction is I was like, Ruby, what the fuck? Right? Like, I don't understand why she continues to trust Christina. Sure, Christina showed up to help, but she always has her ulterior motives. And then when Letty's like, hey, we still can't trust her, Ruby's like, she never did anything to you. She healed you. She brought you back to life. I'm like, but it's all contingent on getting what Christina wants. And so, Ruby seems to still be rolling with it. And that scene where she was like, I've always wanted to be a redhead. So maybe she's going to take some redheaded women's.
They're going to kill a white woman with red hair for her.
Yeah. So
that's
I'm just
wild.
So I can't with Ruby. I was so excited and happy to see Hippolyta come back. Cause who knows? We were in that last episode. Tick was just like, well, she's in the machine. So sorry. But she came back.
He was like, well, I got out. So bye. I'm going to drive her car all the way back home.
Right. And then give the key to Christina. Like it was a lot. And so I was so happy Hippolyta doesn't need a key. She got those things on her wrist to get out and to get in, as we learn, when she needs it. And then it was just a very emotional episode. I don't think I've ever cried or got close to crying until I got to this episode, just kind of going back and seeing all of Montrose's PTSD like come to life again, to see him go through all of those things, to see Tick, your favorite character, Brooke, be so harsh to him when Montrose tells him like, hey, George might be your dad. And I know he's still upset about Montrose's abuse when he was a little kid, but I thought, in that previous episode that they had sort of a come to Jesus meeting about it, and that helped mend a little bit of that fence. But that's why we have Dr. Imani here, because I'm just like, why are you still this mad? I guess it's like another secret, because Tick does ask him in that last episode, what else are you keeping from me? And then he doesn't say like, oh, I might not be your dad. And then it comes out in this episode. But it was just a lot. It was a lot of emotions, particularly once we got to Tulsa and we got to see more about Montrose. And then that whole scene in the house was a lot, when the house is on fire and it went down.
One of the things that I was thinking about when you were talking is I recently was doing a podcast about just PTSD and grief and kind of the PTSD that we're all experiencing while we've been dealing with the pandemic. Just the sense that I always tell this story, I live in LA. So on Friday, I think it was like March 12th or something, there were stirrings of like, oh, well, we might have to be on quote unquote lockdown. I'm like, whatever that means. And then Monday it was like everything shut down, like no restaurant, no nothing, like stay in a house. You can't leave. And I think for all of us collectively, there's always this background of anxiety, just kind of that we live with like in our lives, because we don't know what's really going to happen day to day for the most part. But when you were talking about Tick and Montrose, and yes, I think there have been a few points over this season where, unfortunately Atticus has had to learn really, really deep things from his dad. Like, okay, my dad is a gay man. My uncle might be my dad. And it kind of reminded me of the fact that people, when they grieve or when they're going through the PTSD that definitely Tick is going through, you can go through it in different stages, but they don't have to be linear. So he may be like, okay, I've accepted the fact that my dad is gay, but at the same time, the feelings that he may have had before are likely still there. And he's still angry that he has those emotions. Like, well, I thought you were this. How about I thought you were my dad, and now I know that you're not. So every time Tick makes like, he gets to a point where he's like, okay, I think like I'm okay. Like, I think like I'm on steady footing. I think like, okay, I know where I stand with my dad. Then here comes Montrose like, oh, by the way, George might be your dad. And it's like, damn, like, can I just breathe for a second? Like, you always got like some sort of like, like October surprise for me.
Right. Right.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think the way that I felt about this episode, I mean, my first reaction, honestly, was just why? Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why is this happening? Why is any of this happening? Why is Montrose being re-traumatized with the Tulsa Race Massacre?
Right.
Like, for what purpose? Why is Dee the only little girl we have, but also the only dark-skinned little girl? Why does she have maggots crawling out of her arms? Why are her arms shriveled up? Why was she cursed with spit and all of them being chased by demons? Why is Hippolyta, with all of her power, being like seriously drained of her life force, foaming at the mouth? Like, it was so violent. And why? Like, why are we in this house with this woman who is on fire? And why are we watching Letty like standing there like she's doing this woman who's burning up a favor? Like, again, it's just like another dark-skinned woman. She's being set on fire. Like, it's gruesome. It's horrifying. And then you have I'm sorry, this episode upset me. You have Sonia Sanchez.
Yeah.
Catch the Fire playing over. Like, what are you trying to tell me? Like, I felt like, again, you have the light-skinned woman. She's walking through the fire unscathed. All the dark-skinned people are going through it, and she is walking through the fire unscathed. And I don't understand what I'm supposed to take away from that. Like, I felt very upset by the episode. I was like,
well, let's not also forget about the boy who got shot. Like,
yes!
The boy who got shot in the head, and now his brains are on, like, he was dark skinned,
Yes.
and then his brains are on Montrose's
Yes.
face as a boy.
Yes.
Like, I definitely noticed that, but I was like, okay, let me, I mean, we all go through this. It's like, okay, like, I see what's going on. Okay, let me not trip. Let me try to at least follow the story, and then I can unpack this later.
Right.
I felt, especially when, Hippolyta, like, we go back, like, we're going back and forth. And when they showed Hippolyta all drooling and stuff, I was like, but I thought she was kind of like ethereal.
exactly.
Like, what? I was like, what? This is gross. I was like, what is this? I'm like, wasn't she just like dancing with Josephine Baker not that long ago? It's just like, I was like, didn't she say that she spent the equivalent of 200 like years? I'm like, and I mean, I don't know what's happening to her. I've never certainly experienced it, but all I kept thinking about was a workhorse in the back of my mind.
That's what she was. That's what I'm like,
Yeah.
the mule of the earth.
Yeah.
We expect to be the mules of the earth to like white people. We expect to be the mules of the earth to Black men as well. Like, that's just kind of what it's been throughout history. But like, when Black women are in charge, I just want to know why we are still the workhorse in 2020. Like that, I definitely feel like the show has been having a colorism issue throughout the show. But again, like you know how, Brittany, how I cried on episode 3, like that was my absolute favorite episode. I felt reconnected to my faith. I thought, it did so much for me, that episode. And I was so in the first 5 episodes, which we got to see before the show started. I mean, I was all in. Even episode 5, I was like, and when they killed Yahima, I was like, but I was still like really, really all in. I've just been kind of going with it, since then. But like, this episode really took me out.
What happened on episode 3?
Episode 3 was Holy Ghost. That was when Letty did the exorcism with the Yoruba priestess, and they got the white demons out the house. And then she healed all of the Black people who had been Hiram Epstein's victims in that house.
Yeah.
They all chanted it together, and they all got healed. They were all restored to their original form. And it was just a healing process for everybody involved, including Letty, bringing her back to life after she felt for so long after being killed and resurrected that she wasn't really living. That episode was like her restoration to life. It was beautiful. It was powerful. It was all the things that I think they were trying to do in this episode. But for me, it was just like, there's no reason for this. There's no reason we have to go. Even if you need to go and get the book of names from Tulsa. Why do you need to go and get the book of names 10 seconds before it catches on fire? Why couldn't we have seen Black Wall Street at a time when it was thriving?
Right.
Why is it necessary for us to see this violence? Why is it necessary to put Montrose back through this violence? Like, I feel like the only purpose in that was so that Tick can stop being mean to him, but I'm over both of them. So like, it really didn't move me in any way to see, oh, now I understand why he's such a jerk. Like, okay, well, why are you such a jerk? We saw all that too. And I'm still puzzled as to why you suck and why you're so mean. So when I watched this episode, I said, I got to talk to somebody because I'm traumatized. I'm really traumatized. And like, I'm so glad, that you're on, Dr. Imani, so we can just kind of deal with, like, if anybody else in the audience is feeling the way that I felt, because I honestly, I don't want to use too strong of language, but betrayal comes to mind. I just feel like I felt like my pain and Black people's pain and this history was exploited, and I don't understand the reason why, like from a plot perspective, because you could make the plot anything and you chose this thing, and I don't.
Well, here's a question, because I honestly don't know about the people behind the scenes on the show. So I loved Watchmen, and I love the fact that it, it was a very Black centered show as opposed to what the comic book was. But it was written by 2 white men. And on this show, like who are the writers?
They're mostly Black women.
Okay.
And the showrunner is a Black woman. The showrunner is Misha Green. She did, previously to this, she did Underground. And then you have, just as producers, but I don't think they really have a lot to do with the show day to day, Jordan Peele.
Yeah.
His company is producing. And then J.J. Abrams is also producing.
Okay.
I think I was a little conflicted, right? Like, because like Dr. Imani said in her first reaction, was it hard to go back to the Tulsa Race Massacre? Absolutely. And that was the only time I think so far on this show where I was like tearing up, because especially to see all of the stuff that Montrose went through, and to know that, when Letty gets into Dora's house, like all of those people are going to be killed, and she knows that. And you can see her like struggling with wanting to do something, but not, because she's already been told, like, you can't do anything to change it. And if you do, it'll mess something up. That's sort of a time traveling trope that we see throughout any sort of time travel show.
But that's it, Brittany. That's the point right there. If you cannot change what happened, if you cannot save people's lives, if you cannot provide any healing, if you cannot do anything but re-traumatize yourself, why are we here?
I think in that scene with the older woman who is burning up and holding Letty's hand, I think they attempt to provide some sort of, maybe not healing, but they attempt to provide, at least with that woman, some sort of knowledge like, hey, look, I'm carrying your future. And so the older woman has that line where, like, your child will be my faith come to life, right? So I think in that moment, they're obviously trying to give that one person hope and give that one person some, like, hey, this is terrible. You're going to die in a very horrible way, but this is not the end of your family. And so I think, could they have gone to a different time in 1921? Sure. Obviously, they could have gone to the day before. They have this
literally any other time.
They have this whole setup about, it has to be an intention and the picture, and this is the picture that was taken, and that's how we get to this particular hotel. So I'm conflicted because, one, it's like very violent and it's very upsetting to watch. But on the other hand, so much about the Tulsa Race Massacre has been buried, including how many people died, including the fact that people just pretended it never happened. It's hard, right? Because we had this discussion last week about, like, how much do you have to see Black people suffer to care about it? But I think in a historical perspective, it's like, just like the movie Rosewood. That whole movie was this episode, right? Like, that whole movie culminated to seeing the town get burned down. And I didn't watch that movie for a long time because I was just like, I'm not about to be this mad.
I've actually never seen it. Like when it came,
I've never seen it.
I've never seen it. When it came out, I would like everybody was like, "Oh, you never saw it." And there are just things like have I ever seen Roots the whole way? No. Like there are just certain things like, you know what, I know how this ends. It's cool. Like I get it. I know enough, of the, let's say, dialogue or the themes to be able to like understand when people are discussing it. So yeah, there's certain things that I personally will not subject myself to, but I will say this episode to me felt kind of rushed. I kind of wish that this episode would have been like maybe 90 minutes. Let's say they did arrive to Tulsa that day, like the day that they arrived. I personally would have wanted to see more of, like you were saying, like I want to see more of Tulsa. I want to see more of like, what are these people up to? What was their day like? Because what it brought to mind is when Ruby was in the department store and we spend this time in Marshall Fields and we see like the whole setup and, oh, it's supposed to be so lovely and blah, blah, blah. And I really would have, and for the viewer, we're kind of seeing like, okay, well, in Ruby's world, this is the pinnacle of, sophistication or where she wants to be in terms of, a job and what it would represent to her and what it would show other people, about her. But with Tulsa, I felt like if we would have been allowed to see more, not that what would have happened wouldn't have been just as impactful and we wouldn't have felt it, but I feel like it was like, okay, boom. They got to the hotel and then all of a sudden Montrose is getting his ass beat by his drunk dad. And then it just went off. And one of the things that I really have liked about the Love Country episode so far is that even though they all take place within like an hour, it's jam packed, but it feels a little longer because there's so much stuff going on and there's so much you have to take in. This just kind of felt like in some ways like an assault. There were a few times where I was like, okay, first of all, what is happening? Like, where are we? I knew I had to keep reminding myself of the previous episode, but then I was like, why are we in Tulsa again? And legit, I was like, why did we come like an hour before everything goes down? From that last episode where we're dealing with Bobo, aka Emmett Till, and then we're dealing with every adult in Dee's world completely just on their own trajectory of like, they were just like, oh, like even do you remember the scene where Letty is leaving her house and Dee's now officially missing and Letty's like, oh, hey Dee, go in the house and call your uncle real quick. It was just weird. So I just felt like that was a lot for me, just knowing that Dee is a Black girl who has to deal with her, like one of her friends getting mutilated. But also I was like, you guys, honestly, I'm like, should we bring Dee to this? When the show first opened, I was like, I understand why Emmett Till's mother wanted that casket to be open. I understand why those people would have waited, in the heat with 3-piece suits on, to go see Emmett Till's, body. But I'm like, this is Dee's friend. Why are we subjecting her to the emotional pain of seeing her friend and also the physical aspect of standing out in the heat in like a white dress, I mean, I once had hair. You're trying to keep your hair from like, getting all fuzzy. And that's the first time for me, at least, when I started to feel like, who writes for this show? Because this to me doesn't make any sense as a Black person, as a Black woman, as a Black mom. I'm like, as a former Black girl, I'm like, I don't understand this, but I digress.
She goes through everything in that episode. She gets cursed.
She cursing people out.
She goes through it in that episode, but she doesn't see Bobo.
Right.
Right? Because she leaves. So that's the one very small thing. But yeah, we had a whole discussion last week about nobody's looking for her in the way that they should be. And I was really mad at Letty for giving her the brush off.
To protect a grown man, like, who has no interest in you protecting him. What it reminded me of, actually, was, so Bell Hooks has this really fantastic film criticism book. It's called Reel to Reel, Race, Sex, and Class at the Movies. And so in the introduction, I thought of this, like, immediately watching this episode. So I'm just going to read, like, a little quote from it, because I get this all the time. So I felt some, like, solidarity with Bell Hooks here. But anyway, she says, movies make magic. They change things. They take the real and make it into something else right before our very eyes. Usually when I critique a movie, lots of folks tell me it was just showing the way things are. It was real. And they do not want to hear it when I make the point that giving audiences what is real is precisely what movies do not do. They give the reimagined, reinvented version of the real. It may look like something familiar, but in actuality, it is a different universe from the world of the real. That's what makes movies so compelling. So when I'm looking at that, and we know that this machine is a multiverse machine, right? It's not a time machine. So they could have gone to Tulsa in a different universe. Mm-hmm. And they could have stopped and they could have changed it and they could have done all these different things, you know? They could have saved some people. And that to me, that would have been something incredible to watch. As Black creatives, we can lack imagination because that is what white supremacy does. That's intent is to limit all of our imagination, including other white people. That's why they can't see us in different roles and different, give us different opportunities because their imagination for what a Black person is and can be is so limited. And we, as products of a white supremacist society, take that on too. So I'm wondering, Dr. Imani, for one, watching this, how do we process trauma after a really difficult episode like this? But also as Black creatives, what can we do so that we are processing trauma on screen and not exploiting Black trauma on screen?
Okay, good questions. I think the best thing to do is to, we're here discussing this episode. I think that I actually had to go and journal about it. I had to go and talk to my, friends about it. I think that we collectively, not individually, but collectively are people where we've had to keep secrets. We've had to, take on the opinions of the people who may have, in the past owned us. And that's led us to, where we are in terms of, our relationship with white supremacy. I think when we don't talk about it, I think when we don't acknowledge it, I think when we don't digest it and sift through it, that we end up basically buying into what white supremacy as a whole wants us to feel, which is that we are, we can be brutalized, set on fire, shot in the head, frothing and writhing, that we're workhorses. I think that we need to actually discuss what it is. Now, does that mean that, the show, will the writers maybe take that into consideration? I don't know. But I think that just in general, we need to get these feelings out of ourselves, out of our bodies, so that we can collectively see okay, this made me cry, or this made me angry, or I don't understand this, or, this really bothered me. As much as I love this show, but I didn't like the episode, I do like the fact that this can be used as a tool for discussion. I think that we really do need to talk about this a lot, because when it comes to PTSD and, the PTSD that I think, all of us had watching this episode, the thing about PTSD and anxiety is that one of the reasons why it comes to be is because in the actual traumatic experience, it's so overwhelming that we may not be able to actually have the words to explain how we feel. And therefore we won't talk about it. But with something like this, we need to get these emotions out. We need to ask questions. We need to, talk to each other hey, maybe you feel Letty being, the high yellow girl walking through the fire while, this older Black woman, is completely burned to ashes. Maybe that upsets you. Maybe I feel fine with it. Let's talk about that. Why? And it's not about, I need for you to understand my point of view or else, but I just think that as a people, discussing these things is revolutionary. Being able to take the time to actually sit down and be we need, honestly, we need to talk about this. The way that people used to have book clubs, this is what I really think, when it comes to shows like this, I think that this is something that we really kind of need to do.
Yes, I think that it's so great. I mean, obviously we started this podcast because there's so much to talk about, and we love talking to our listeners as well about what's happening. But Brittany and I are also screenwriters. We're also creatives. We're also trying to create work that will have an impact on people and get them to talking as well. But it's so important for me to create work that makes me feel like episode 3. Well, yes, we are haunted by white supremacy, but here are the tools that you can use. I think that's the whole thing about this show, right? Here are the tools that you can use to overcome white supremacy, to fight it and to win. Like that was so, episode 3 was so victorious for me. And so I'm like, how can I do that? Like, I want to make people feel like that. Like if we're going to have to deal with the trauma of what, is like to be Black in America and in the world, let's also deal with the joy. What's your advice for like how Black creatives can process trauma on screen and not exploit the trauma and re-trigger Black people for no reason?
I think there's 2 things to consider with what you asked me. I think it kind of reminds me of a habit I had to break myself out of. Like, let's say I'm talking to, like, I'm with one of you guys. We're like out in public and, something happens and it involves a white person. And then we'll all instinctively, not really instinctively, but we were taught to like, be like, oh my God, look at this person over here. This is crazy. Like I had to teach myself how not to whisper. That to me is stifling my opinion and stifling my voice. So I kind of see like this similar situation or a similar dichotomy when when we're dealing with people who are Black, who write shows about Black folks, who, when it's time to discuss trauma or portray trauma on the screen. I think that we need to be really true to who we are. I think that we really need to not get so caught up in how can I make this palatable for everyone. I think it's more so about making it palatable for ourselves, because here's the thing. When we make it palatable for quote unquote everyone, then we end up in a situation where we do have unnecessary trauma, because when it comes to the history of Black folks in this country, it's, it's like, I feel like with people who are not Black, it's like, okay, so it's slavery, then Martin Luther King, and then Obama, and then that's it. Right? Like there's no in between. There's no like Shirley Chisholm. There's no, there's nothing in there. And so I feel like when it comes to us, like we know pain. We know it. Like we know pain so badly that like we're often empathetic towards other people that don't deserve it. Right? Like I want to see us being able, I want to see us being able to tell our stories the way they need to be told. But I want to see us handle that with a little more tact, with a little more sensitivity. Like honestly, they could have left all that stuff in there in this episode. Like legit, they really could have. But I need to see more of Black people thriving as well. Cause I mean, I'm telling you, it was like, boom, they got out the portal, they in the hotel, and then Montrose is like, oh my God, like, shit's going down in an hour. I'm like, really? Like it was too much. And I just want to see a better balance. I just want to know that when I'm watching a show like this, I want to feel like the Black folks that are writing for this show, I want to feel like their desires for the show are not being taken over or ignored by, let's say, like the executives of the show, the executives who are responsible for the show. That's what I want to feel. I want to feel like this is very authentic. And I mean, we can argue about like, well, how authentic is it going to be on HBO? Blah, blah, blah. But I think that in order for us to be able to be authentic, we have to have the courage to create the space where it's like, you know what? Like y'all need to be a little uncomfortable for right now. You know what I'm saying? Because I mean, think about how many times you've heard a white person say, well, like, well, like I wasn't there. I wasn't a slave master. It's like, yeah, but you still benefit. You still benefited. And I just want to feel not vindication. I just want to feel acknowledged. I want for my feelings and my, all of the cumulative experience, the cumulative amount of experience that I've gotten to so far in my life, I want it to be taken into account when we're telling stories like this, especially coming on the heels of, we talk about, Black Girl Magic and Black Girls Rock. I'm like, we completely like just we dropped D off and didn't even like pick her up. Like it was really, I was really like, this is messed up. Like this is awful.
Yeah.
And she turns into a pickaninny.
I was like, who is that?
Exactly.
I was not expecting that to be a part of the curse and the spell. But speaking of pain and relationships, that seems to be a through line through a couple of our characters, whether it is Ruby and Letty, their beef as sisters, their ongoing just drama that could be tied up in colorism, though they never talk about that.
Yeah, but it's kind of obvious.
It's something that I thought it would come up. Like, I thought that Ruby maybe.
I thought Ruby said something. About like, well, I thought she did say something like, well, Mom, you were always Mom's favorite or something. Like Ruby said that to Letty, I thought. And for some reason, I took that as
light skin,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's one way. And I think she's the youngest too. Mm-hmm. But they all still had this very complicated and bad, from what I can tell, relationship with their mother. And then on the other side, you have Tick and Montrose, and their relationship has never been good because, Montrose was very abusive toward Tick. And in this episode, we see why, but we see how he became the person, because he was trying to overcompensate for the fact that he was gay. And so we see his dad, and it's like this whole, I don't like the phrase generational trauma, but it's some generational trauma right here.
No, generational trauma is a thing. Like that's definitely a thing. For sure.
But how can we think through these relationships? So in seeing like Tick and Montrose, particularly for parents, or if you have a difficult relationship with your parent, like, what can we take away from this? Maybe how not to do things, about how not to do things, or just if that brings up feelings in people, how should they sort of process it?
That's a good question. I think, there comes a point when, we're all little at one point, and you're around your parents, and then you get older, and there comes a point when you start to realize that your parent is just a person. Like, your parent isn't this mythological figure that you always kind of held in a certain regard. Because, I mean, when you're little, your parents are like from your perspective, they're huge. Mm-hmm. And they take care of everything in your life. And so the majority, what they tell you is pretty much all that's what you go by. They help you shape, your world. I think one of the take-home messages, aside from, don't engage in toxic masculinity, that we can take from Tick and Montrose's relationship, is the fact that, like Montrose, he is a flawed man. He's flawed. Like, we all have flaws, and that's okay. And I think that despite the fact that Montrose and Tick argue a lot, I do like seeing that they're actually talking. Mm-hmm. That they're not just, because I kind of feel like I kind of feel like their relationship in the past was just kind of like, forget it. Like, I don't need to be here. Although, like, I'm really happy to see them talking it out, despite the fact that the themes and the subject matter that they're talking about is very, very difficult, because it seems like there came a point in time where Tick just saw his dad as just like, oh, he's just a regular dude like me. And then he started to see all these other flaws and attributes of his father that he may not have really liked or didn't even know, that they were there. But I think that's kind of the take home message. Like, there comes a point where you and your parent are almost equal, and you have to learn how to kind of reconcile that. Even if that parent is flawed, it's like, well, granted, you only get one parent. If that parent is completely awful to you and very abusive, no one's saying that you need to have conversations with them or even like be around them. But I think in this case, I think the love that Tick and Montrose have is kind of being explained in the fact that they're having these very like deep exchanges. Sometimes they're forceful exchanges. I like the fact that they're crying. That they're not like, men who are like, I'm just gonna like try to, will the tears back into my eye sockets. Like, I like to see this part of the process, because this is something that we oftentimes don't see. Like, it reminds me kind of remember that scene in the 5 Heartbeats when Church, is that his name? He was leaving, and his dad was like, well, if you're going to be leaving on the road, then, you need, like, you're not welcome back in my house, and da 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 da. And there's always this trope of black men, black fathers of a certain era having to be like, I loved you, but I loved you because I beat you because I loved you. And it's like, no, you beat me because that's what you knew how to do. and you were beat. And you knew it was wrong, and people don't always do what's right. They do what they know. I like seeing kind of like this, interpersonal therapy between Tick and Montrose. But yeah, I think that this is really the time when Tick is like, oh, you just a dude. Okay. You're a flawed dude. And I can respect that.
I love that. This has been so helpful, so illuminating. I feel so much better now that I have talked about it and processed it. Thank you so much, Dr. Imani, for your expertise, for your time, for your words of wisdom. We're going to take this to heart, and I really hope our listeners were also benefited by this, because we needed this. We needed this talk, and we needed these steps. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to take this advice and try to heal our own relationships. And then as creatives, try to create art that is going to center our feelings and, not have to be palatable for everybody. We thank you for that. We thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you so much. I'm so happy I got to come on here and talk to you guys about Lovecraft Country. Cause like I said in the beginning, I really love this show. And I like unpacking it. I mean, I do think, as we've all discussed, that, there's maybe for season 2, we can work on some things.
Exactly. Yes.
First of all, they did a good job, but there's still some things that I think that we all here believe they could, work on a little bit better.
Definitely, for sure. Well, we appreciate you.
Thanks.
All right. Now that we have sort of worked through our trauma and our emotions about this episode, what other questions or things, Brooke, do you think we need to still discuss?
So I feel like there's still a little bit of trauma for me. One of the things that I didn't mention when talking to Dr. Imani was that Letty and the great grandmother, that conversation that they have where she's like, my great great grandson is going to be my faith made flesh. That's supposed to be comforting. I wholeheartedly reject this idea of I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. Honestly, I think it's such bullshit. I hate it, because I think that my ancestors wanted to live. I think that my ancestors wanted to survive. They wanted to be free on earth. I don't think that they wanted to sacrifice themselves, for my greater good. And I don't think that they should have had to. And that's not something that I want to celebrate. I honor it, but I don't think that this is the way that things are supposed to be, or, some way that that is inspiring or encouraging in any way. I find it very self-absorbed. And so it's just another way for me that this episode was just okay, so y'all won't be born if the people in the house get to survive. Okay. If I could go back in time and make my ancestors not go through slavery, I would do that. So I just her pleading for her child. Her child is so much more important. Her unborn child's life is so much more important. It was frustrating to me. Even Dee, I love Dee. I feel she does not get the love that she has deserved.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, if Dee doesn't survive, actually none of that horrible stuff happens to Dee, because she doesn't actually have to live in that world, because none of these things in the past have happened. And so that to me is a net good. I'd say the questions that I still have, I feel like there's some plot holes in this for sure. If the book burned up in Tulsa, how is it not burning up when Letty's being bombed and walking through the fire and everything else? At least Khaleesi,
again, with the Game of Thrones,
her clothes burned off, her shoes burned off, all those things, she came out naked every time.
I assume it's just magic and the fact that, she's cradling this book. Maybe that gives it her invulnerability rubs off on it. But that is a good question, because for all the problems that Game of Thrones did have, when Daenerys caught on fire, so did her clothes. Her hair didn't, but her clothes did, and everything around her did. And so that is interesting, because that was one of the things I was worried about when she was kind of taking this book out. But we also know, which is interesting, the book has magic. And so you can't just open it either. And so maybe there's something that, did they have to go back to 1921 to get this book? Like, did they have to go back to that particular time? And maybe it was like the book was lost after the fire. You know, if a house burns down, the rest of it just gets demolished and put into the trash. And so maybe that's what happened to the book. But I'm willing to believe the book also doesn't burn, which again,
they could have found it at a different time in a different place. Exactly.
Yeah, maybe. Unless it was in, the landfill or something. And then who knows where it is at that point.
I'm just saying that, like, there is literally no reason they did not have to go based on the rules that they created for their own show. These characters did not have to go on at this specific hour of this specific day to get that book. They just didn't. But my other question then is too, how does she know that her baby is invulnerable too, just because her baby is inside of her? Like, I feel like that has not been established. She did not discuss that with Christina, and she's taken a whole lot of risks without understanding whether or not this baby is going to be fine just because she's getting blown up and nothing's happening to her, like, externally.
Mm-hmm. I think once she hears, and that's a good question, but once she hears that, she has a son, and then, in that scene where she tells Tick, like, oh, we'll name him George. And we already know because Tick went to the future that his name is George. So,
but they're making a lot of wild assumptions.
I think
right?
They are assuming, and a lot of things on the show is just kind of like, we're just supposed to go along with it instead of seeing things. And like Dr. Imani mentioned, like, even if we were going to go to Tulsa in this horrific day in the city's history, we could have gotten there much earlier than, 10 minutes or an hour before everything went down. You know what I mean? Like, we could have spent more time there. And I think that just goes back to when Misha did that interview before episode 1 with The Watch, and she talked about like wanting to get through the plot really quickly because she just wants to fit in a whole bunch of things. Like, she always wants it to move faster and faster and faster. And I do think, as we've been talking about this whole season, like, that's one of the things that has been a hurdle for a lot of people. I think they just assume certain things. And when I said they, it's, showrunner, writers, whatever, they just kind of wave away certain things. And then when people have questions about it, like, wait, how did this happen? What happens to this? It's just assumed that it gets sacrificed for the sake of the story. But I think these are all of the like logistical things that would make the story better, in my opinion.
One logistical thing, well, I guess two of the callbacks that they had in this episode that I can think of. One was that, Letty in the house, burning all around her. That was her dream, and she was pregnant. That was her dream. So she was actually wearing the same dress in the dream that she's wearing, that she stole out of the hotel. That was a premonition and not, just some vision that she was having before. And then, of course, with Tick being the mysterious stranger who shows up and helps to defend the younger version of his father and his uncle and his mom with the baseball bat that he was dreaming about in episode 1 in the opening there. So it's nice to see some things come together.
Yes, but I do think that already breaks some of the rules.
Yes, right.
So because I think that breaks some of the rules that Hippolyta establishes about not changing anything.
It didn't change it because they did what actually happened.
No, but that means that they've already been there. So I'm assuming the stranger that shows up, it's like a time loop, right? Like, they've already been there. Exactly. And so they've already, like, Tick has already been there previously. I don't think some random stranger shows up, or else we would have saw another person come up. It was Tick all along. So that tells us we've already established there's multiple realities, there's multiple Earths, there's multiple whatever. But the fact that he was there in young Montrose and young George's memory kind of breaks this whole bit about you can't change anything.
And you know what, too? Also, what that does is go back to the daggone book, stealing the book and bringing that into the future. That has to change some stuff. So again, you can take the book and save yourselves in the future. And that doesn't change anything at all. That's why, honestly, I hate time travel. I hate everything about time travel. I mean, like across the board. Doesn't matter what the film is, what the TV show is. They never follow the rules that they establish. They always create some sort of like annoying loophole. And this is just another one of those. But yeah, like if you can't change anything, then why do you get to go back there and interact with people? That's changing things.
Yeah.
Interacting with people you never interacted with. Letty talking to all these people she never talked to before. Like all this stuff is changing.
And there are two dads coming out to specifically help her. I'm assuming that's not what happened in the past. And shout out to Will Catlett for being in this episode and being like really dope looking historical Black man. And I can see him.
And he's mean in literally everything that he's in, but he's such a
nice person. But that scene where he comes out and teams up with Dora's dad to protect Letty when these white dudes are shooting at her. Again, that's not something that happened in their, in their 1921 reality because Letty was not there. Maybe they were shooting at the white dudes or whatever, but they weren't shooting to protect her, right? And so then it becomes this whole thing about, Letty giving them intel, like how many people are there? And she tells them there's a whole, slew of white men in the truck down the block and all of these things that she, as you mentioned, is interacting with them in the past, and that it did not change the outcome, but only because she didn't try to change the outcome, even though things had already definitely changed. You know what I mean? So it's a lot. And I agree. Time travel is terrible and people should stay away from it.
And seriously, if you're not going to use time travel to make things better, then get out of here.
Or make it worse. But in this case, we would have liked to make it better.
Yeah.
I just have my main question going into the next episode is this business about, will Christina actually kill Tick? We've been told time and time again that she will. I know you don't care, but we've been told time and time again that she will kill him. She will, use whatever to transform and become immortal. And so I think they're just setting us up for that not to happen. And I'm interested to see what the payoff of all of this returning to Artem conversation might be or will be. I'm curious about whatever Ruby's doing, only because she frustrates me, only because she seems fully bought into whiteness and whatever privilege she can conjure up when she's a white woman. And I'm not here for it in her capacity or whatever. And so those are my main questions going into the final episode of season 1.
I feel like in the final episode, they're going to take the first 10 seconds and like heal Dee or whatever and get her out of the way and then go on to Artem and have the rest of the episode like take place there. But I don't really have any predictions. I feel like Atticus is not really necessary anymore. Even his blood, like, especially if Letty really, her baby really is invulnerable too, then, we don't really need Atticus anymore or his blood. So, and he's got that Marvel money now. So
he's not going to be back for season 2. Yeah. Just to go slightly back. I know the whole getting of the book was to heal Dee because Christina said she can't do it without the book of names. But like, are they really you think they're really just going to now turn it over to her? I don't think so.
They haven't shown any wiseness. I was like, what's the word? Wisdom.
Yeah.
At all. So I don't see why they wouldn't. I don't see what the fight would be about, He promised to go willingly. He already gave her everything she needed anyway. What's one more thing? And he already knows he's going to die according to the book that he read about his son.
But considering the book is spelled, right? So I'm wondering if Hannah spelled the book so that it can't be used by the Braithwaites.
That's what Hattie said.
So that means Christina wouldn't be able to wield it potentially. So we'll see.
I think she wouldn't be able to open it. But so that's why, Tick's going to have to open it and then give it to her so she can heal Dee. And then she's just going to take it and do whatever, she needs to do for immortality, which again, this is just so, I'm glad that Lancaster is dead though. Cause I really thought they were setting it up like, oh, Lancaster's the real bad guy. Like, and it's not Christina. She's actually okay. Like, okay. So I'm glad that Lancaster is now permanently dead, and we know for sure he's dead.
And we know for sure he was using black bodies for
exactly
parts.
stealing black people bodies.
Yeah, I think if we're making predictions, I think that maybe both Christina and Tick will be vanquished.
I'm fine with that.
I know, in episode 10, because Christina's whole mission is for immortality so she can experience life. Like, it's so tiny. It's so small. It's so self-serving. It's not like, oh yes, I want to be immortal so I can do all these good things that I can use with magic. Her thing is just about her. And this is the part that frustrates me so much about Ruby. Like, you know that Christina's only out for herself, and yet you're a willing participant in these shenanigans. It's just ridiculous to me. So I hope both of them, they die at the end of episode 10, but I'm not sure. But if I go back to our conversation with Ioma, she said if they get a season 2, they want to likely explore different stories. So maybe it's Diana's story or somebody else's story. But I think, as you mentioned, this might be the end of Tick, and I hope it's also the end of Christina.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's pretty clear that, Journey was the star of this show and intended to be the star of this show, since the role was pretty much beefed up and everything like that, so that she could play more of a central role. I'm fine with, Tick dying or whatever is going to happen in the next episode. But like what you were saying about Christina being self-absorbed and like having such small goals for herself, like I think that's the other thing that makes this show really different from Watchmen. Like even the so-called villain of that show, where they made, where they made the Vietnamese woman the villain,
Lady True,
she had grand plans to make the world a better place with all of that power, and it just upset the white people because they like the world to be the way that it is in the control of other white people. So yeah, these shows were like kind of going on like parallel trajectories. And like, I definitely think that this Lovecraft Country has taken a bit of a left turn in the last half of the series. And yeah, they said on Twitter, some of the writers, I can't remember who it was, said that Gia is supposed to be coming back. That's not the last that we'll see of her. But also at this point, it's just like,
for what? Why would she be coming back?
Yeah. So, but anyway, so I imagine that Gia is also going to be back in this finale episode, and we'll have something to do, but it does not seem like it's going to be what I was hoping, which was all of the marginalized people coming together to defeat white supremacy. And again, when are we going to get back to the Yoruba priestess? When are we going to get back to African spirituality and the ways that so clearly worked for them to defeat white supremacy, to defeat the white usage of power that Christina and her cohort are wielding? Like, that was so clearly a powerful tool that worked in episode 3 and continues to work. Every time they tried to get into the house, they couldn't get into the house because of that Yoruba priestess's magic. So I'm just like, I'm frustrated that they're still so obsessed with trying to figure out how the white people stuff works that they are ignoring that. Even Letty, I
think we're one and done on that.
Really? I wouldn't be surprised. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. I feel like I'm going into the finale with very low hopes. And, I think we will just have to see how it plays out.
We will definitely have to see. And I think that's a good place for us to wrap. Shout out to everyone who has been listening and commenting and leaving us 5-star ratings on whatever platform you listen. It's been really amazing to engage with you all on Twitter, on Instagram, all over the place. And we love the conversation. We love all of the theories, and we love the feedback.
We also have gotten some really great comments on YouTube, so that's cool too. Thank you so much for checking us out on that platform. Someone said you looked really cute, Brittany.
Thank you to whoever that was. Thank you to whoever you were.
I should have written it down, but shout out to our YouTube commenters.
Shout out to you. Well, we only have one more episode, so if you have any questions or theories or predictions, actually, send us your predictions for how you think episode 10, the season 1 finale is going to wrap up. Hit us up on Twitter at Black Girl Watching and on Instagram at Black Girl Watching. Or if you're old school and you want to send us an email prediction, do so. blackgirlwatching@gmail.com. And I think that's it for me. Anything else for you, Brooke?
That's it. Just remember to use the hashtag Black Girl Watching as well so we can find all of your great commentary.
Thank you so much. I am Brittany Danielle.
I'm Brooke Obie.
Black Girl out.
I say, where is your fire?